Good morning, everybody. Back to Hot Mess Life Coach Season 4, Episode 4. I'm coming at you solo today, and I want to talk today a little bit more about authenticity, specifically about how to remain authentic in the middle of being judged, when you're really being judged or when you fear being judged, just when that internal fear and anxiety monster is running rampant inside you because of your own judgment, because of other people's judgment. And how do you remain authentic then? How do you do it? How do you stay true to yourself when all you are is feeling anxious and scared about how other people might perceive you, how other people might see you, and sort of how you come off to the world? Well, I don't know. I don't know the totally know the answer, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to figure it out together. So, um, one of the things that is so important to know is that you can't find your way to anything anywhere effective when you're in fear. So the first thing always to do is try to calm down the fear. Even if you're in an objectively fear inducing situation, it still doesn't do you any good to panic. So even if you're being chased by an axe murderer, it is better for you to take a moment to clear your head, calm down, take a deep breath, and figure out the best hiding spot than it is for you to run around flailing in a panic because you are going to be murdered by that axe murderer then. So fear is never helpful. Fear is not the way to solve our problems. Fear is rampant right now in society. Fear is the Kool-Aid that we're drinking. It's the liquid, it's the water that we're swimming in. It's encrusted the entire environment in which we live. When we watch the nightly news, we will see things to be afraid of. If we look outside in the world, we will see things to be afraid of. Oh, and my co-host Mo is here. So give me 1 second and I invite Mo to join us. Let me see how I do that midstream. Hi, can you? Oh, I toggled you on and off. There you are.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry about
Welcome.
that. I'm getting
No,
settled into my new setup here. I'm at my new house, and this is the first time that I'm using my desk. So
cool. Whoa. How is it being in your new spot?
amazing! I just harvested some corn in our little garden in the backyard this morning.
Wow. Very cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really nice. We're super happy here.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Wow. Yeah. That's a new background for sure.
Yes. Yeah. It'll get better. This is like our makeshift. Like just barely got all our stuff in here.
Oh,
We'll
yeah. No,
decorate it. Yeah.
there's no judgment on your background. That's what we're talking about today is judgment. And I am not judging your background. I love your background.
Thank you. I
So no
appreciate
need to explain. I wish there was more moving boxes in it.
it.
That's very cool. Wow. So that's such exciting news. Okay. So where we were, I don't even remember exactly what I was saying because I was just sort of babbling about fear and authenticity and how fear is not the way to move ahead and solve your problems. Oh, I think what I was talking about was how even if you're in an objectively fearful situation like being chased by an axe murderer, it's still in your best interest to take a minute, look around, take a deep breath, calm down, do a breathing exercise, and then keep running, because otherwise you don't have clarity. You need clarity. I mean, there's obviously like the fight or flight survival response that will get you out of like a sticky wicket, but
Yeah.
beyond that, fear adds confusion, and so you want to dispel the fear if you can.
Yeah. Well, I feel like if you're being chased by an axe murderer, you might not have time to take a deep breath. But if you do, then do it.
I mean, if you're watching the same kind of horror movies that I watch, then even if you're being chased by an axe murderer, you have time because they walk very low, even though they still somehow catch up to you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I don't watch horror movies, so I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's nothing to be scared of. They're very very slow.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That's good.
But yeah. So welcome to today's episode. Is there anything you want to jump in and say right now at the top about fear of judgment and authenticity?
Hmm. I'm just gonna follow your lead on this one, Brian.
Okay, right on. Well, so my lead was to kind of describe the need for calm and a place of non-anxiety in order to have clarity. Because when we're trying to be authentic, but we're afraid of being judged, it's going to leave us in a place of that's like a tense place. That's a place of tension, right? Like you're in
Mhm.
competition between the you that you want to be, the real you, quote unquote, and then the you that you think someone needs you to be in that situation or society needs you to be in that situation. And
Yeah.
there's that push pull between those two versions of us. And if the goal is to in our authenticity, then a precursor to that is going to be learning how to calm down,
Yeah.
learning how
Yeah,
to reduce
and
anxiety.
you mentioned that tension, and I feel like each person, or I guess there's like a broad spectrum of how intensely people feel that fear or anxiety of judgment. Like some people feel that a lot more intensely, and therefore a lot more of their actions end up being determined by that fear of judgment. There are plenty of people who like are constantly looking like, is there a possibility that someone could judge me? And if there is, then how do I choose how I behave based on avoiding that judgment? And then on the other end of that spectrum is people who don't care what other people think, which is way harder to do depending on your background. But there are some people who just like don't have a care in the world of what other people think. Even if what other people think sometimes could help regulate their behavior in a positive way. Um, and then they just behave based on what they want. And so this there's like a happy balance where we can obviously regulate uh, in a way that like helps us behave respectfully and kindly to others, but there's also in that balance is behaving in a way that we want to, behaving in a way that matches our true selves and takes us to a place of authenticity.
Yeah. And the other part of this conversation that I was thinking about this morning and trying to figure out like how exactly to bring this in is like the situations where being your authentic self is actually not safe. And so
Yeah.
is authenticity, does that always need to be the goal? Because I know what we're talking about this season is authenticity. And
Yeah.
so like if we're trying to be authentic in a place where we're being judged all the time, okay, that's a beautiful goal. And if it's possible, great. You know what I mean? Then go ahead and more power to you in terms of living in your authenticity. But there are situations in which not being in your authenticity is actually the safest thing to do. And I think it's worth just mentioning that also because like authenticity is like a it's like a big word, like it's a spiritual value, right? Like
Mhm.
let's be authentic, but it's not a requirement of it's not like a moral requirement of being a good person that you're authentic 100% of the time or something like that. And so if there's a situation in which you know centering your authenticity completely is going to lead you directly to being attacked, for example,
Yeah.
then you're not obligated to be authentic in every moment of every day. Like our obligation. I mean, I don't even know fundamentally what is our obligation, like to our fellow human being, to like you are your brother's keeper kind of thing. Like yeah, it's important to have authenticity, and it's important to have fearlessness, but it's also important to honor our intuitive nudges. And sometimes our intuitive nudges say, in this moment, play pretend.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, for example, that I teach in prisons every once in a while. I teach communication skills in prisons, and there are plenty of men who are incarcerated that are very gentle, kind souls who, when they are in a prison environment, there's a lot of like posturing that has to go on because if you're perceived as like soft, then you could end up being, a target. And so a lot of people who are incarcerated end up, we have like this stereotype about people who are like in prison or being like really tough and hard. And it's not because everybody who is in that environment is that way. It's not because that's like what is their authentic way of being. There are some people who are like that, but a lot of the people who end up getting incarcerated have to put on a face or a mask to protect themselves in that environment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, what do we say to like a person, an incarcerated person, about how to juggle their security and their safety and their survival with their authenticity? Because even though it might be safer to pretend in any given moment, it doesn't lead to happiness. So that's the thing. So we first is our survival, so if you need to pretend in order to survive, you do that.
Yeah.
Once you've survived, then how do you shift back into the mode of authenticity that's going to allow you to thrive, because you can't thrive outside of it?
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with like identity. Like you can adjust and you can change your behavior for the purpose of survival without that having to become 100% who you are. Like when I look back at like when I was younger, like there are versions of myself that existed that may not present as strongly now because of the ways that I like adapt to my environment, but those parts are still a part of who I genuinely am. And so you can kind of like invite pieces of yourself back into your life after you've had to be in a like survival state, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah, that does make sense. Do you have do you have an experience of having to have reinvited a part back in?
In small ways, not necessarily in as strong of a way as like, oh, like having gentleness have to, be put on pause when you're like incarcerated. But there, like for example, I was in like a pretty controlling relationship in my life, and in order to get out of a very controlling relationship, I had to set aside some of like my uh caretaking, gentle, wanting to do everything for the other person kind of part of myself, and then move more into like I'm doing what's best for me. And not, like it was almost like I had to forget wanting to take care of another person for a while in order to get myself to the place where I could leave a bad relationship, and then I invited that back and made it okay for myself to care for my current healthy partner in ways that nourish and support our relationship without me abandoning like my own needs.
Wow, that's amazing. So what was that process like of splitting off and then reinviting that piece of you back in? How did that go? Like, what, paint the picture? Picture it,
Um,
Sicily, 1947.
yeah, I think that there was like almost some internal judgment that like happened to try to like it was to try to push me in a direction that would help me get out of a bad situation, and then I had to like reprocess and rethink those judgments, and like for example, if I was like, okay, like you are like being kind of a pushover, you're um abandoning yourself for this person, that's not okay. So it was like there was like some internal boundary setting slash judgment that happened, and then once I was out of that situation, then I could go back and reassess and be like, okay, caring for other people is not a bad thing. It's like this is what I describe to some of my friends sometimes. There's like a pendulum for most behaviors. If you swing too far to one side and then you recognize that this is not good for me, then you may swing to the other side. And then once you find yourself too far over here, then you kind of overcorrect until you land in the middle. And so I had like this, I don't know what exactly the best word for it is, but this self-sacrificing that I needed to correct. So then I started like over prioritizing myself, not in a way that necessarily hurt anybody else, except for the controlling partner that didn't want me to break up with them. Um, but then when I decided it was time that I wanted to be caring for other people in a more like interdependent way again, um, then I'm kind of going back into this pendulum and finding my balance. But yeah, it's like you're trying to remove the internal judgment about any characteristics that you may possess.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, the internal judgment is like, I think that's the one that, this might be true for many people also, I don't know, but thinking of all the different kinds of judgment there are, it's the internal judgment that throws me off my
Yeah.
authenticity track more than any kind of judgment from other people. Like,
Well, if you think about it, any judgment from other people, the only way that it lands with you is if you also have that judgment internally about yourself. Like there are some people, like for example, like I watched this video about like how horribly judgmental and fat phobic people were in the 2000s. And it was like a video of Britney Spears and all the crappy things that people said about her. Um, even though she was I don't know, it was a ton of cultural judgment, but basically the only way that another person's judgment hurts us is if we have somehow internalized a piece of that judgment ourselves. Like it will not hurt me if somebody calls me selfish or ugly or whatever, unless there's a part of me that believes or worries that that is true.
yeah, you're so right. That's the four agreements. Like, that's like that's elementary, like the four agreements. It's so true. It's easy to forget though, and just think that the judgment from the outside is what hurt us and that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so important to, like, all of this spiritual stuff that we talk about, like that people read about, like trying to understand the four agreements and why it's true. Like that, judgment has no perch to sit on unless it's sitting on a perch where you already are judging yourself. Like, those aren't just, I mean, they're nice ideas, right? But they're not just pretty ideas. They're like the tools for freedom, like for real emotional freedom, if we can remember to implement them, if we can remind ourselves of the truth of them. Like, but it's very hard in the moment when you're in the middle of being judged, like this paper got a C, or you're being written up, or whatever it is, like, so it's your teacher judges you, your boss judges you, one of your parents judges you. It's very hard to go, oh, that's only hurting me because there's a part of me that agrees.
Yeah.
That's not the knee-jerk reaction. The knee-jerk reaction is to be like, how dare you talk about me like that? I'm sensitive in that area and it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the way, and I don't have like a perfect solution as to how to strengthen this, but technically, if we have a strengthened internal sense of self, the stronger our internal sense of self is, the less external judgments hurt us. But there are plenty of people who, depending on how they were raised, struggle to develop or maintain a internal sense of self. Like that's partially like the like multiple personality disorder or bipolar personality. I don't remember which one it is, but there's one of them where specifically some of the symptoms are caused by having a lack of a internal sense of self, and so then you look outwards to other people to like measure yourself, and that's like a part of that, like a part of your lived experience. And so there's this whole spectrum of how strong is my internal sense of self, and that largely affects how much external judgments will like hit home for you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that makes total sense. And like, I mean, there's so many ways to sort of skin this cat of trying to strengthen our internal sense of self, because there's like the bottom up approaches, which is like you starting with the body, and then there's like the top down approaches, which is starting with the mind, which is what we do in coaching a lot. But
Yeah.
one of the things that can be helpful, it's in terms of like a somatic approach, is just literally this right here, massaging this part of your neck. This part of your neck is like connected to the,
Is it the vagal nerve?
yes, thank you, the dorsal vagal fin nerve, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that nerve is, it's it's a big part of emotional regulation. And I've been reading a book by two different books, one by the holistic psychologist and one by Gabor Mate, but they're basically saying, they're talking about the same thing, which is like how to use the mind to heal the body and how to use the body to heal the mind. And that it's like a circle, that it's a loop, and you can use either one to heal the other, because there's no body and there's no mind. There's only the body mind, because we just slice it all up with words. You know what I mean? Like there's no shoulder, there's no sleeve, there's no Morgan, there's no Brian. Like when you think about it existentially like that, it's clearer how the mind body connection works, because it's one thing. But that vagus nerve is responsible for emotional regulation and for like the spitting out of the calming neurotransmitters, like oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine, that kind of thing. And so just spending a couple minutes a day massaging this, and you can do this too if you do this when you're feeling triggered or when you're feeling judged. Like, have you ever noticed, like, when people are feeling judged or when someone's accusing them, sometimes people will actually do this on the back of their neck? That is our physiological imperative to try to calm down. Happening in real time. It's just us like, like get the hairs on the back of my neck to calm down. But what we're really doing is rubbing the dorsal vagal nerve.
Yeah.
And
well, that's so smart. That's so smart, because when you're fearing judgment, you're experiencing like anxiety and fear, that is a nervous system activation in which basically means that you can't quite think your way through that when you are experiencing it, because it shuts down when you're experiencing like a fear response or a fight or flight response or an anxious response, it generally will shut down your prefrontal cortex, and you're not going to be able to use logic super well. So even if you're like talking yourself through it logically, it's not going to hit your heart very well. And so if you can start with some of the more like physiological things, or like, butterfly taps, or what Brian was talking about with the dorsal vagal nerve, starting with those and helping your nervous system regulate, then we'll get you to the point where you can talk yourself out of it. But you can't start by being like, oh, I shouldn't care what other people say. Then you're just judging yourself and reactivating your anxiousness and judging yourself. Like, it just like becomes this compounding judgment instead of actually caring for yourself and reducing the impact of the perceived judgment in the first place.
Yeah, it would be like being in the middle of the mugging and being like, bullets do not hurt me. I'm fine without, bullets cannot hurt me.
Or like punching yourself to try to make the pain of the bullets go away. Like, that doesn't.
Yeah. It's like there's a fly in the logic ointment for sure.
Yeah, get your nervous system feeling safe first, and then you can talk it out with yourself after.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true. And this is no small thing. Get your nervous system regulated first. It's
hard.
It's hard, and it's not even culturally. I don't want to say that it's not culturally acceptable, because sure, it's acceptable to regulate your nervous system, but it's not. It's actually not culturally sort of like, in a way, it's not culturally acceptable. Like you can't just like be out at a dinner party, feel triggered, and then be like, I'm going to go over in the corner and shake.
Yeah.
Which is like how our species regulates its nervous system, but it's not culturally acceptable to do that. In fact, shaking and trembling at all is the opposite of culturally acceptable. It's like, pull it together. You seem weak, even though shaking is actually the way that we are meant to discharge all this trauma and this emotional energy and the fear of being judged and all those different things. We're supposed to discharge them through those kinds of physical means, right? But they aren't culturally acceptable to do. It's not like regular party etiquette to be like, oh, I'm gonna go shake this off right now, or I'm gonna regulate real quick before I continue this conversation. But it's actually huge to do it. Like, so if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, next time I get triggered, I want to self-regulate first. It's going to feel weird when you try to do it, because you're going to have to like excuse yourself to the hallway, or like go into your office and close the door, or whatever it is that you need to do to put yourself in a safe place where you can regulate. but it is worth it if you do it,
Mhm.
because it doesn't take that long, especially once you start practicing to self-regulate, and you can feel yourself shift back down from a place of fight or flight back to rest and digest. You can feel when it happens, and when it happens,
Yeah.
your ability to work online.
Well, there are some ways to help self-regulate like your nervous system without necessarily having to leave the room. There's some like kind of discreet ways. So like if you're sitting at a table and like other people are talking to each other, you can take butterfly taps and just tap bilaterally on your legs, just like alternate on your legs with some deep breathing. That's one way. Another way is the physiological sigh, where you breathe all the way in, and then you take one more like sharp breath to get a little bit more air at the top, and then release all of it, and do a couple of those. Both of those help with regulating the nervous system, and you don't necessarily have to leave the room to do it. You can just kind of do it like discreetly.
Yeah. Oh, those are great. Thank you. I will try the knee tapping one. I love it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Is there anything else you want to say before we jump off for the week?
Yeah, I think just this ties back to the four agreements, but as you're trying to, determine how much can I be in my authenticity without, risking my own safety, or without, creating a, potentially dangerous situation for myself. Oh gosh, my brain just went blank. 1 second.
Four agreements?
Yeah, four agreements. Yeah, try or not try, just notice if you start to judge yourself in moments where you're receiving other judgment. Like try to release any judgment that comes up that says I should not be affected by this judgment, because that in itself is a judgment, and that will increase the intensity of it.
Yeah, beautiful. That's such a good reminder. We can just let ourselves feel what we feel. It's okay. When you're being judged, it's okay to feel judged.
Yeah, I feel judged, and that's okay. And I can, take care of myself. And then if I want to unpack that later, I can.
Yeah, when Logic Brain is back.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, Mo, thank you. This was a pleasure talking to you. And so everybody knows we are back. Hot Mess Life Coach is back, but it's on Fridays now, weekly, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So you can find us every week on Friday morning going forward. Oh, we got a comment. Great stuff, guys. Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, talks about the conflict most people experience beginning in childhood between our two non-negotiable needs of attachment and authenticity. Yeah, it's true. That is a great book. So, Michael, thank you for your comment, and thank you for tuning in. If you want to find out more about Morgan and what she does, you can do that by visiting her at selfloveatlas.coach or on Instagram at Morgan Barbrett. If you want to learn more about me and what I do, you can find me at thebrianhogan.com or on social media at thebrianhogan. And otherwise, we will be here next week at 9 a.m. for another episode. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love. Thank you, everybody.
See ya.